Recession fears are rising after first quarter GDP contracted for the first time in 3 years. But economists caution an official downturn may not be declared for months or even years. While two consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth is often treated as a rule of thumb for a recession, it's not the official definition, and it doesn't always hold up. Hey, did you see the GDP numbers for quarter one? They actually went down. The economy shrank. Really? How much? About 0.2%, which is the first drop we've seen in 3 years. Why that drop sets off alarm bells gross domestic product, or GDP, is basically the sum of everything we buy and sell as a country. There's a neat shorthand for it. GDP equals C plus I plus G plus open parenthesis, X minus M close parenthesis. C equals consumer spending, what you and I buy. I equals investment, business spending on factories, equipment. G equals government purchases, roads, schools, salaries. X equals exports, our goods sold abroad. M equals imports, foreign goods we buy. When GDP contracts, it just means that the total slipped compared to the previous quarter. And if that happens 2 quarters in a row, a lot of people start yelling recession, because historically, that's when things really start to feel painful. Why that matters to you and me. If they do call a recession, it's often months after the downturn actually started. That means by the time they announce it, the worst could already be behind us, or just getting worse. Policy response. Governments and central banks keep a close eye on these official declarations. Once a recession is declared, you might see interest rate cuts, stimulus packages, or tax relief. Perception versus reality. Investors, businesses, and consumers react to both the fear of recession and the fact of it. Sometimes fears alone can slow things down further. People spend less, companies invest less, which then actually contributes to a downturn. In the first quarter, shrinkage gets everyone's hearts racing because 2 down quarters often signal a recession. The rule of thumb, 2 quarters equals recession, is a handy shortcut, but not the official definition. The real call hinges on a bunch of data: jobs, incomes, industrial output. So it can take months or even longer before someone in a suit officially says, "Yep, we're in a recession." So, who decides? Think of this like asking who wears the referee badge here. It sets up the question, when we say recession, who's in charge of making that announcement? It's technically up to the Business Cycle Dating Committee, BCDC. The BCDC is a small team of economists whose job title sounds fancy but boils down to this. They track when the economy is growing or shrinking. They aren't part of the government, and they don't pick sides politically. They're non-governmental and non-partisan. So you don't have to worry they'll call a recession just to score political points. The BCDC operates under the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER. The NBER is like the parent organization or the umbrella. It's been around for decades, tasked with digging into big-picture economic trends. Within that, the BCDC is the specific squad that zeroes in on recessions and comprises a group of prominent economists, led by Stanford professor and economist Valerie Ramey. These are top-tier academic and policy economists. You know, the kind whose names you see quoted in the Wall Street Journal or on Bloomberg terminals. Valerie Ramey, who teaches at Stanford, chairs this committee. When you see her name attached, you can trust the committee's got heavyweight expertise. The committee bases its determination on a broader set of indicators and only makes the call after reviewing months of backward-looking data. Broader set of indicators means they look at lots of things: GDP, employment figures, industrial production, income measures, stuff like that. Backward-looking data means they wait for actual numbers to come in, data that's already happened. They're not guessing what might happen next month. They're poring over what happened in the last few months. Like umpires calling a baseball game, the BCDC's job is to make an official call after the fact. Imagine you're watching a baseball game and you ask the umpire, "Was that pitch a strike?" The umpire looks at it, maybe even checks replay, then says, "Yep, strike." Similarly, the BCDC watches the data roll in, then says, "Yep, that downturn was a recession." But crucially, it's after the pitches have already been thrown. That means we often don't know we're in a recession until it's already underway or even over. In real time, you might feel things slowing, layoffs, businesses cutting hours, but the committee needs hard proof. By the time they've got it all, the economy might already be on its way up again. The Michael Darda quote, "The NBER doesn't predict recessions. They tell you after the fact." Michael Darda is echoing the same point. This isn't a crystal ball exercise. They're not out there saying, "Next month we'll be in a recession." They wait until the numbers have been cleaned up. Sometimes preliminary figures get revised, and only when a downturn is unmistakable do they label it officially. So why does it matter when, or even whether, a recession is officially declared, especially if the call comes long after the pain has passed? Imagine you write a history book about the 2020 downturn. If you say it began in March and ended in May, as the NBER did, you frame it as the shortest recession ever. That label colors how we remember it, and whether future policymakers decide, hey, that strategy worked last time. If Congress or the Fed rolled out stimulus 6 months before the NBER's start date, they might argue we beat the recession before it officially began. Or the opposite, if help came too late, they get dinged. Investor psychology. Fund managers and ordinary folks both pay attention to the call. If it's official, they might change portfolios or move to cash, even if in practice the economy has already bottomed out. How the NBER actually makes the call. They don't just look at 2 straight quarters of GDP decline, the old textbook rule. Instead, they gather 4 big indicators. Employment. Are people losing jobs? Real personal income. After you strip out inflation, can people still afford grocery bills, rent? Industrial production. Are factories and plants humming or shutting down? Real business sales. Is demand for goods and services collapsing? And they judge each downturn on 3 dimensions. One is depth. How big is the drop? A little dip might be painful, but a cliff is a crisis. The second one is diffusion. Is it all over the place or just in one corner? If only auto plants are idle, that's bad for Detroit, but not the whole country. And duration. Does it last long enough to matter? A 1-week blip in steel output isn't a recession. The COVID-19 example. The outlier. A particularly sharp drop in just one area can sometimes tip the scales, as it did during the COVID-induced recession of 2020, when a severe and widespread collapse in activity led the committee to declare a recession that lasted only 2 months. It's not just 2 down quarters of GDP, Darda said. That's a common misconception of what a recession is. Darda cited the 2020 recession as an unusual outlier. It only lasted 2 months, but the drop was so steep and broad-based that it met the threshold, he explained. The unemployment rate shot up from 3.5% to 15% in essentially 2 months. It was the shortest recession in history, but also the deepest. Even during the Great Depression, we didn't fall that much in any particular month. On the flip side, 2022 was an example of how relying on GDP alone can be misleading. We had two down quarters of GDP and a down stock market, Darda said. So everybody thought, we're in a recession. But as it turns out, there was no recession. One of those down GDP quarters was later revised slightly positive. Also in 2022, unemployment fell while job growth remained positive. Right out of the gate, that tells you there's something wrong with calling a recession, he said. How data can get very noisy. Imagine you're at a crowded cafe trying to eavesdrop on one conversation. The background chatter makes it hard to pick out what's really being said. Economic indicators work the same way. You get unemployment numbers, factory output stats, consumer confidence surveys, and they don't all sing the same tune. Sometimes one will spike, another will fall, and it can be tough to know which is the real story. Why the unemployment rate matters, but only so much. Darda points out that if you had to latch onto one hard number, unemployment is your best bet. Every recession on record saw joblessness jump by at least 2 percentage points. It's like a super loud alarm bell. When people suddenly stop working, the economy is in trouble. But here's the catch. Even that bell isn't infallible. You need to look at all the bells together. Wages, factory orders, consumer spending, because leaning on one alone can mislead you. Stocks aren't the final word. After the market roller coaster of 2022, where the S&P lost about 25% from January to October, people were convinced a recession was right around the corner. It makes sense. Stock prices reflect expected corporate profits, and if investors panic, you start to worry. But history warns us, in 87, 2011, late 2018, the market tanked and the economy didn't follow into recession. Because of that, the NBER, the team that officially declares U.S. recessions, doesn't even look at the stock market when making its call. Soft surveys can mislead too. Consumer confidence polls might show people feeling gloomy, say because they're worried about tariffs or future price hikes. But those soft feelings don't always translate to real behavior. People might grumble about the future at dinner parties but still keep spending. Claudia Sam devised a simple, quick alert tool. When the 3-month average unemployment rate jumps by half a percentage point, 50 basis points, above its low in the prior year, think recession likely started. It's not about predicting downturns. It flags when the labor market is really turning. It went off briefly in 2022 and again in 2024, but crucially, no recession followed. That shows it's useful for early warning, but not foolproof when economics get weird. Limits of rock-solid indicators. Michael Pierce at Oxford Economics reminds us there's no ancient playbook. Recessions are rare and can come from all sorts of shocks. Pandemics, trade wars, financial crises. So, no single warning light works every time. Plus, the U.S. economy today is more services-driven, with manufacturing a smaller slice. The old signals you watched in the factory district just don't carry the same weight. What to do now? Right now, hiring is slowing a bit. People are clocking fewer overtime hours and tariffs are squeezing costs. But it's too early to say for sure we're headed into a full recession. Odds might be above normal, but still under 50-50, according to Oxford's models. We'll only know once the NBER umpires finally drop the gavel and say, yes, that was a recession. Economic data is messy. No single number tells the whole story. Experts use a mix of hard stats, like unemployment, soft surveys, like confidence, and special rules like the SOM rule to get as clear a picture as possible. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one.